Hello, everybody. Welcome to another video lecture. This is going to be the second video lecture or video lesson on survey research. So let me share the screen. Okay, so in our first video lesson, we looked at how to conduct a survey. So how to ask some good questions, the types of errors that you can get when doing a survey, and you know, basically what essentially a survey is. In this lesson, we're going to be changing gears a little bit, and we're going to be talking about how to analyze your survey data, right? So you've done a survey, or somebody has done a survey, you have the data from that survey, which is really great. You know, what do you do with it? Basically, you do statistical analysis. This is essentially, therefore, quantitative research, right? It's quantitative research, it's quantitative analysis, right? You're turning your data into numbers, and you're going to analyze those numbers using statistics. So what I'm going to mention is that what I'm going to be telling you in this video lesson is essentially a shortened, a really short version of an entire class that you can take in sociology, social research methods 2, quantitative research. And so this lesson is kind of just a kind of a preview, a little bit of a preview into what that whole class would be about, you know, because that class is really about statistical analysis. You know, it's really that quantitative research, you know, that uses survey data. Okay, so what are we going to look at in this lesson? So we're going to look at 3 types of analysis. Univariate analysis, where you're describing a single variable. Bivariate analysis, where you're looking at the relationship between 2 variables. And multivariate analysis, where you're looking at the relationship between more than 2 variables. And when we do this, we're going to be going back to this concept of spuriousness, right? So if you remember all the way from, I think it was our first or maybe second week of class, we talked about spuriousness. And we're going to see how you can use multivariate analysis to control for spuriousness. So don't worry if you don't remember what spuriousness is. I'm going to review it again when we get to that section of the lesson. Okay, so let's first talk about what univariate analysis is. So univariate analysis is the most basic form of analysis that you can use to examine a survey. And this essentially involves describing a single question. You have a question, and what you're going to do is you're going to analyze the results of that single question, right? And so univariate analysis is really about description, right? You want to know something about your population. Let's say you want to know something about America. You know, what percentage of people go to church? What percentage of Americans are conservative? How many Americans, what percentage of Americans will likely vote for President Biden, Vice President Biden, right? You know, so that, you know, that's a single question, you know, and so what you do is you would have a univariate analysis of that single question. So let's see an example actually from the survey that I talked about in the previous lesson, the GSS, the General Social Survey. So I've tried to pick a question that I thought would be interesting to people, and we can kind of see how it changes over time, right? And so that is Americans' views of homosexuality. And so we see, okay, the GSS has asked this question about, you know, Americans' views of homosexuality, right? So, and, you know, the person's interviewing the person, you know, they're sitting down with the person they ask them this question, all right? And now, what about sexual relations between 2 adults of the same sex? Is it always wrong, almost always wrong, sometimes wrong, or not wrong at all? And, you know, then the interviewee can, you know, can respond and say, oh, you know, I think it's this, or I think it's that, right? And so what we have is we have a sample of a people. We have sample of Americans answering this question, right? Some of them will say always wrong. Some of them will say not wrong at all, right? So we have different people giving us different answers. And so the question is now, what do we do with that? Well, we can use univariate analysis to analyze it, to see what Americans think about homosexuality, right? So how do we do that? So one of the first basic ways we do that is you create from your question what's called a distribution table. So a distribution table is essentially a table that lays out all the answers or replies you got from your question. So let's look at the distribution table of the question that I just was describing. Okay, so here is our question, right? From the GSS from 2010. That's one of the more recent times that this question was asked. And so here is a distribution table of people's answers, interviewees' answers, or they're called respondents' answers to this question. Okay, so let me break this table down a little bit so you can understand it. This is useful because you'll be looking at these types of things, in the future. Okay, so what we have is on the very left, we have all the possible answers, right? Always wrong, almost always wrong, sometimes wrong, not wrong at all, right? And then we get a total, right? That's the total number of people who actually gave us an answer, right? And so we see, we can see how many people answered. And then we have a missing category, right? So, DK means they didn't answer. IAP means they had no opinion. NA means not applicable, like for some reason, the person skipped it right over. And so what we see here is the missing category is the non-response, right? So if you remember from the previous lesson, this is an item non-response. This is the number of people who chose not to respond to this question. So they're simply missing. So that's what we have in the first column. The second column we have the frequency. So the frequency is simply the number of people who gave a reply for each one of those possible answers. Right? So we see that. So the total number of people who answered it was 1,223. Right? That was the total number of people who gave an answer. The total number of people who were missing was 821. So that's actually quite large, right? That's actually a fair number of percentage. We can see that there's about 40%, right? So 40% of the people chose not to answer. And you can see that the IAP, they didn't have any opinion. That's quite high. It's about 37%. And so we see, why are people not choosing to answer? It's a sensitive question. You're really getting into things that people might not feel comfortable about. And so they just, they don't want to answer. And so we see it's questions like this. This is a sensitive question, so it's going to have a higher non-response rate. Okay, other people who did answer, what we see is 555 said it was always wrong, 52 said it was almost always wrong, 97 said it was sometimes wrong, and 519 said it was not wrong at all. Okay, well, what do these numbers mean? So now we can go to the other columns. So our first column, the next first column we have is a percent column. So this is just a percentage for all the possible answers. This is actually not that useful. The reason why it's not that useful is it's messing us up because it's including all the people who are missing. And so to really understand what the table is telling us, we want to go to the valid percent. The valid percent is actually where it's at, right? So the valid percent is the percentage of each answer of the people who answered our question. So what we see from 2010 is 45% of people thought it was always wrong, right? So we can see that even 10 years ago, there was a bit of a negative view of homosexuality, homosexual relations, but not all negative, right? It was kind of like split, because we also see that 42% of the sample said that it was not wrong at all. And so this is giving us a snapshot of America in 2010, right? Remember, we don't care about the sample, we care about the population. And so this survey is telling us that in 2010, about 45% of Americans thought it was always wrong, while 42% of Americans said it was not wrong at all. And so we really see that it's a split. we see that Americans are divided on this question, even as early as about 10 years ago. Right? And then we have the last column is a cumulative percent, basically adding up all the answers. And so what this is telling us is, 57.6% of Americans in 2010 thought that it was at least sometimes wrong, right? They thought it was sometimes wrong, or almost always wrong, or always wrong, right? So here we have, this is kind of a description of one variable. It's, it's an interesting variable. It's something we might be interested in finding out about Americans. And so we do a survey, we ask a bunch of people this question, and we can kind of get an average, we get some sense of what Americans are answering. What it also allows us to do with the GSS is actually see how it changes over time, which is, kind of useful. Right, so this is the same question that was asked in one of the very first GSS surveys from 1973. And so what we can see is that people's views of homosexuality have actually changed dramatically over time, right? So in 1973, nearly everybody thought it was, but nearly 3/4 of Americans thought it was always wrong, right? And only 11% said it was not wrong at all. And so if we're looking at, this answer always wrong, we can see, we put this on a graph, and we can see how much this response has actually fallen, right? That, it started off around 70%, and then by 2018, it's dropped to just about 30%, right? And so we can see in this graph the rise in the acceptability of homosexuality. Right? By asking the same question, right, year after year after year. So, it really shows you how useful surveys are and how useful univariate analysis is. Okay, so you got a distribution table. You can, the distribution table is really useful. It tells you a lot of stuff about, that question. To analyze it a little bit more with statistics, we do something very, again, very basic or very fundamental. We look for the measure of central tendency. This is sometimes called the average, right? We want to know? What does the average American think about homosexuality, right? And so we use this term average, or normal or average, or whatever. But actually, there's not one measure of central tendency. There's 3 different measures. This is the mode, the mean, and the median. So let me describe what these are, and then we'll see it in action with another question. Okay, so the mode is the answer that is most frequent, right? So we can kind of return briefly back to, right, this distribution table here, right? So the mode would be actually always wrong, right? It's the most frequent answer, the answer that has the highest response rate, right, or highest number of answers, right? That's the highest valid percent, right? So the mode is the answer that is the most frequent, right? Okay, so that's the mode. What is the mean, right? So the mean is basically the average, right? So this only really works for numerical data, right? You're gonna take everybody's answer, you're gonna add them all the answers up, and then you're going to divide by the number of the population. So let's look at an example. So the example we have is the number of children somebody might have, right? So you could have 0 children, you could have 1, you could have 2, you could have 3, you could have 4, you could have 5, 6, 7, you could even have 8 or more children, right? And so again, okay, so first we need to ask, well, what's the mode? So the mode is the most frequent. So that's actually 0, right? So most Americans, most people don't have a child, right? So 28.9%. But now we want to know the mean. What's the average number of children that American would have, right? So we take the 2,760 people And we find out how many children they all have, and then we divide it by that number, 2,700, and we get our mean, right? So we find that the mean is 1.8, right? So the average American in 2010 had 1.8 children. So that's the mean. Next, we have the median, right? The median is another measure of central tendency, another measure of what it means to be average. The median is going to be the answer that is directly in the middle of all the possible responses. It's going to be at the what's called the 50th percentile, right down the middle. Right? Let's see it in this example. All right. So to figure out what the median is, we're going to find out, well, what's the answer that would have the 50th percent? So we can look at the cumulative percent. So it starts off at 28.9%. Okay. Then one child is 45.9%. Okay. Well, we're not quite yet to 50%. Up. Two children. Now we've gone up to 69%. So the 50th percent is going to be within that two, right? That's going to be the, two is going to be that response that's right in the middle of all of the possible answers. And so we look at the chart above and we see that the median is 2. It's the answer that's right in the middle. Okay, so that is univariate analysis. You're describing a single variable. You do this by looking at a table, and then you can kind of figure out what the average is by using these measures of central tendency of a mode and mean and median. Okay, let's continue on and let's talk about bivariate analysis. So with bivariate analysis, what you're now doing is you're not going to just describe a single variable. Now you're going to look at what the relationship is between two variables, right? How are two variables related together? So if univariate analysis is simply describing one thing, bivariate analysis is analyzing or examining the relationship between two variables, right? Now, we can remember that this actually is useful because it goes back to this idea of a theory. Okay, so if you remember, what is a theory all the way back to when we talked about theories at the start of the class? A theory is simply when one phenomenon is connected or related to a second phenomenon, right? More specifically, we can say that is a causal relationship, right? That you have an independent variable, the cause, and you have a dependent variable, the outcome. And what you're basically saying when you're creating a theory is you're saying that a change in the independent variable is going to cause a change in the dependent variable. And that's essentially what basically a theory is. You're saying this one thing is going to affect the other thing. And this is essentially what bivariate analysis is. Hold on one second. Right? This is essentially what bivariate analysis is, right? You're examining the relationship between two variables in a survey, and you're basically what you're going to be arguing is that this one variable you have is going to be causing or affecting this other variable in the survey. Right? The first phenomenon is causing the second phenomenon. A change in the independent variable is going to cause a change in the dependent variable. Right? So let's see an example of this in using the survey, using the question that we just had. Right? So we can think to ourselves, okay, what might be something that affects views of homosexuality? Right? Let's say that homosexuality is our dependent variable, right? And we want to say, well, what causes or affects somebody's views of homosexuality, right? What might make them believe that it's always wrong versus not wrong at all, right? So we think to ourselves and say, oh, well, maybe religion, right? And so that is basically our theory, right? That, we think that religiosity, the more religious somebody is going to affect their views of homosexuality, right? That there's something about being more religious, we think, is that going to give people more of a negative view of homosexual sex relations, right? And I'm just using this as an example, but actually, as we're going to see, you know, the data is going to show this to be a bit true, right? Maybe not surprisingly, right? So this is our theory, right? So that religiosity is going to have an effect on views of homosexuality, right? So now what we can do is we can use bivariate analysis to test this theory, to look at it, right? We're going to take two questions from our survey, right? One question that asks about homosexuality, one question that asks about religiosity, right? So these are indicators, right? Measures of the concepts, right? If you remember back to operationalization. And so we're going to see how are these two questions in the survey, how are they related? Is somebody who is more religious, are they more likely to have a more negative view of homosexuality? This is bivariate analysis. Okay, so how do we do that? So with univariate analysis, we use a distribution table. With bivariate analysis, we're going to use what's called a crosstab, right? And so it looks very similar to a distribution table, and to some degree, it essentially is, right? So we have a table that's now not just one question, but now two questions, right? So on the left-hand column, we have the question about homosexual sex relations, right? So again, we see always wrong, almost always wrong, sometimes wrong, and not wrong at all. Right? And we can see the total number of answers to these responses in the column all the way to the right, right on where it says total, right? So we can see that about 54.8% said it was always wrong, and 33.2% said it was not wrong at all. So this actually, this survey was taken earlier around 2000. So you can see how it changes a bit. Okay. But what we also have is we have a second question. Now we have a question about religious self-identity, right? And so basically the survey asks people to say, you know, how strongly do you feel your religion is? And so somebody could say strong, they could say somewhat strong, not very strong, or I don't have a religion at all, like zero, right? And so you have this kind of other kind of measure, right? So you have two measures here: one measure of views of homosexuality and one measure of a religious self-identity. And so now what we want to do is see how those two measures are connected. To do that, what we want to do is look at the percentages along one of the rows. So let's look at always wrong. Right? So these are people who are going to have a negative view of homosexual sexual relations, right? And so what we want to see is religion having an effect on somebody's view that homosexuality is always wrong, right? Homosexual sex relations are always wrong, right? So you can look at the numbers. I give you people, you know, a little bit of time to look at it, right? See what the percentages are, you know, see what you think. Right? But I think the answer is pretty clear. Yes, right? A person's religious self-identity does seem to be having an effect, right? This independent variable does seem to be causing the dependent variable of you know, views of homosexuality, right? So what we see is somebody who is very strongly religious, strongly identifies as being religious. 70% of these people think that homosexual sexual relations are always wrong. Then as their religiosity weakens, as it's now it's only somewhat strong now, their view that is always wrong drops to 57, not very strong drops to 51. And then if a person has no religion at all, then it drops to about 26% think it's always wrong. So we can see that as a person's religiosity decreases, their view that homosexual sexual relations also decreases, right? So this is giving us an answer. It's saying, yeah, there does seem to be a relationship, a correlation between religiosity and views of homosexuality. we have to remember what? We have to remember that correlation does not mean causation, right? That just because they're correlated doesn't automatically mean that they're related, that they're causally related. But we've already covered that in a previous lesson, but it's good to keep that in the back of our mind. Right? We could do the same thing to not wrong at all, right? So here we see the reverse trend, right? Somebody who is strongly religious, 18.1% think it's not wrong at all. Somebody then, as their religiosity gets weaker, then they're more likely to think it's not wrong, right? So somewhat strong, 32% think it's not wrong at all. Not very strong religious, 34% think it's not wrong at all. And then if they have no religion, 63% think it's not wrong at all. And so what we see is there does seem to be a relationship between people's religiosity and their views of homosexuality. Right? And so we have found this out essentially by doing bivariate analysis, looking at the relationship between two variables. Okay, now let's go to the final type of analysis. Right, now we got to multivariate analysis. Right. So multivariate analysis is when we're looking at the relationship between more than two variables. Right? Univariate is 1, bivariate is 2, and multivariate is 3 or 4 or 5, right? More than 2. Right? And so what's interesting is, okay, with multivariate analysis, we're still going to look at the relationship between two variables, but now we're going to add other variables in to control for them. And so what we're doing is we're including what are called control variables, right? These other variables that we think might be having an influence on our independent variable and our dependent variable. Why do we do this? We're checking for spuriousness. We're checking to see if there is a spurious relationship, right? We want to eliminate that possibility. We want to be more sure that our correlation does mean causation, right? And spuriousness is one of the reasons where it might mess us up. All right, so let's review this idea. Let's review the idea of spuriousness. Okay, so what is spuriousness? Right, so we have a theory. Our theory says that we have an independent variable and that the independent variable is causing the dependent variable, right? Is causing is having an effect on a dependent variable. A change in the independent variable is going to cause a change in the dependent variable, right? The more religious somebody is going to cause or affect their views of homosexuality. Okay, what's the problem? The problem is, let's say that we see a correlation. Let's say that we see religiosity go up, and then we see negative views of homosexuality go up. And we say, okay, there it is. There's our relationship. This is causing this. The problem that could be messing us up is the spurious variable. Right? A spurious variable is this third invisible variable that's having an effect on the independent variable and also having an effect on the dependent variable. And so it's messing us up. It's making us think that there's a causal relationship between the IV and the DV when there actually is not, right? There is no relationship between this and this. It just appears that way, right? Because of the spurious variable. And so what we want to do is we want to control for this. We want to check and see if there is a spurious variable. If we do that, if we can eliminate the possibility of a spurious variable, then we can be more sure that our independent variable is actually causing our dependent variable. Right? Let's see an example of this in action. I think an example will really help to make it clear. All right, so we have this theory. Our theory is that the more religious somebody is, the more they're going to have a negative view of homosexuality. we want to know, well, is there a spurious variable that's messing us up? Right? In our bivariate analysis, we saw that there was a correlation, but maybe there's a spurious variable that's making us making that messing up our theory. What could be a spurious variable? Age, right? So here's how this might work. We know that older people are more religious. And the older somebody gets, and the older somebody is, the more religious they are. Right? People who were born in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, they're more religious than people who were born in the 1990s or early 21st century. Right? So people who are older are more religious. What we also know is that people who are older have a more negative view of homosexuality. Right? That over time, homosexuality has become more acceptable because younger people have become to accept it. Right? It's the millennials, it's Generation Z that have become more accepting of homosexuality. Right? And so older people are both older, they're more religious, and they also have more of a negative view of homosexuality. Not all older people, remember, but on average in general. And so what could be happening is it could be that maybe religiosity is not causing negative views of homosexuality. Maybe it's simply the fact that age is the actual cause. Age is the spurious variable. Age is making people more religious, and age is making people have more of a negative view of homosexuality. Right? So here's our theory. Religiosity is causing views about homosexuality, right? Independent variable causing independent variable, but maybe our spurious variable, age of the respondent, is a spurious variable. It's messing our theory up. It's making us think that this causes this when it actually doesn't, right? When it's actually just an illusion, right? So why would we might think this is true? So we could run some crosstabs again. The first crosstab we run is the relationship between age and views of homosexuality. Right? So we got homosexuality on the left here and then age at the top. And what we want to know is, do older people have more of a negative view about homosexuality? And it turns out that they do. Right? So people over the age of 45 versus people younger than 44, right? People older than 45, 61% think it's always wrong versus younger people, 47% think it's always wrong. Or we can go to not wrong at all, right? Over 45, 25% think it's not wrong at all, whereas younger than 44, 41% think it's not wrong at all. So age is definitely having an effect on people's views of homosexuality. Right? What about religious? Right? What about how religious somebody is? Right? What we also see is that older people are more religious. Right? 42.9% of people older than 45 say that they're strongly religious versus 30% of people who are younger. Right? 9% of people older than 45 have no religion versus 18% of people who are younger. Right? So we see that older people are more religious. So here's what we might be thinking. Older people have more negative views of homosexuality. Older people are more religious. So maybe age is a spurious variable in the relationship between religiosity and views of homosexuality. Maybe religiosity is not causing a negative view of homosexuality. Maybe it's simply appearing that way, falsely appearing that way, because of the age of respondents. Okay, hopefully this is clear. So what do we need to do? We need to control for age. We need to factor in age of the respondent to control for it and see whether or not it's messing our theory up, whether it's having an effect on our data. All right, so to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to include age as a control variable. Right? And basically, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to run some more crosstabs. But now we're going to split up our respondents into older respondents who are older than 45, and younger respondents, younger than 44, right? And so now what we're going to do is we're going to see the same question, the same bivariate relationship, and see whether or not the relationship still holds, right? Let's go and have a look. All right, so here's our original crosstab. Right, here it is, right, that we saw before. Now we're going to split this crosstab into two crosstabs, and we're going to split it by age. We're going to have one crosstab for older people, and we're going to have one crosstab for younger people. Okay, so now got a lot more numbers. Right, so at the top part is for younger people. Right, here we see 18 to 44, younger people. And then in the bottom, we see 45 and above, right? So older people. All right, so we're splitting kind of like right down the middle, right? And so then what we have is crosstabs again. So what we want to see is, does this relationship between religiosity and views of homosexuality, does it still hold in these two different age groups? If there is no relationship now that we've controlled for age, then we can say, oh, well, age is a spurious variable. If the relationship still exists, even when we have factored in age, then we can say, well, that age is not a spurious variable. Like the relationship still holds even when we have controlled for or factored in the age of respondent. So let's have a look. So again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look across the rows. So here we have the top row. This is now for younger people 18 to 44. Okay? So is there still a relationship between how religious somebody is and their views that homosexuality is always wrong? So you can look at the numbers and see whether there still is a relationship. Right? So what do we see? Yes. Right? There is still a relationship, right? So a younger person who is strongly religious, right? 64.9% think it's always wrong, versus somebody who is not very strongly religious, 48.9% think it's always wrong, versus somebody who has no religion at all, only 19.2% think it's always wrong. Right? So younger people, there's still this relationship between religiosity and always wrong. All right, what's about not wrong at all? Is there a relationship now there? Yes, there is. Right, but actually it's getting a little bit more fuzzy. Right, but generally it's still there. Right, so if you're strongly religious, you 27% think it's not wrong at all, versus if you have no religion, 73% think it's not wrong at all. Right, so there's still that relationship holding. All right, now what about older people? So we know that the relationship still holds for young people. Does the relationship still hold for younger people, for older people? So now we go to the bottom half of the table. So we can look again at the numbers. Is there still a relationship there, even when we factor in age? Yes. Right? So somebody who's strongly religious, 74% think it's always wrong. Somebody who has no religion at all, 36.5% think it's always wrong. Right? And so we can see that religiosity, how religious somebody thinks they are, is still seems to be affecting their views of homosexuality. Right? We do the last one, not wrong at all. Right? Is there still a relationship? Yes, there is. Right? Somebody who is strongly religious, 12.9% think it's not wrong at all, versus somebody who has no religion, about 50% think it's not wrong at all. Right? And so what we have done is that even after for controlling for the age of a person, we find that there is still a relationship between how religious somebody is and their views of homosexuality. So what does this mean? Whoops. This means that age is not a spurious variable. We have eliminated that possibility of age being a spurious variable. Okay. I tried to use this as an example. I really wanted to use this as an example in class, in person, so we can talk about it, make sure that it's clear to people. Unfortunately, we got to do this through video, but hopefully the example I've given is clear, and how you can control for, you can look or examine for whether something is spurious by using multivariate analysis, right? Which is really quite useful, right? Because it's allowing you to really be more sure of cause and effect by allowing you to control for spuriousness. Okay, so that's essentially it for today in this lesson. We have univariate analysis, we have bivariate analysis, and we have multivariate analysis, allowing us to control for spuriousness. That's it.